Hi, this is Barry, and welcome to the Simplicity Zen podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, I'd appreciate it if you could take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe and alerts. This helps motivate YouTube to broadcast the podcast to a wider audience. They go very much based on metrics. If you want to sign up for updates, you can go to the Simplicity Zen website and sign up there. And of course, if you're listening to this in various podcast players on your device, they all have subscribe functions. Today, my guest is Barbara Baccei. Barbara is a longtime member of the Valley Stream Zen Sangha in Sacramento, California, and is a teacher of sewing the Buddha's robe. She's a senior lay student of Soto Zen priest Valorie Beer. Thank you for being here today with us, Barbara.
My pleasure.
So you just moved to Denver, is that right?
I did. I've been here for almost 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm. And
Yes.
the motivation was mostly to move closer to your family, is that right?
Yes, I lived in Colorado for 26 years,
Mm-hmm.
during which time I met Bruce. And we married 11 months after meeting, bicycling, and then we decided to relocate to California, Northern California, which is where he was from.
Mm-hmm.
I traveled back and forth quite a bit because my children, who were college age at that time, were
Mm-hmm.
still here. And then, but they've subsequently gotten married and had children. So I've had a very strong tie here. And I decided it was time for me to relocate here.
Are you going to look to participate with the local Zen Sanghas or mostly do stuff remote that you've already kind of have in
Both,
motion? Okay.
both. It's really interesting as I come back and I'm in a little apartment after being in a large home, which is really right-sized for me. I um, I have this real heart draw toward diving more into zazen and practice and contemplation. It's like when everything has been stripped away with all the activity of the move, I'm really um, invited by something deep inside of me to really make my practices central. So to that end, I've been doing a lot of reading. I found a couple of local groups that I'm going to investigate to see if there's um, some simpatico between us. And I will also I'd like to stay plugged into my Sangha family in California. That has been so wonderful and supportive of me. And of course, my teacher that you mentioned, Valorie Beer, has kind of a international Sangha. So, that I'm not right there down the street from her is in keeping with her style of emanating the Dharma.
Do you guys meet online as a wide-ranging Sangha, or is it mostly individual
Well, we
Zoom?
mostly do individual Dharma talks, but we have done some group Sangha things via Zoom. When the pandemic first erupted, we met like that quite regularly. And when Bruce passed away, we did a group sit and chanting for him as well. So um, I'm hoping that if that's appropriate, we'll revive that.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think in the two I know of in Denver or Denver area, there's the Z Denver Zen Center or Zen Center of Denver, and I think that's actually in the White Plum lineage, so they do koans and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
And then there's, I think, the Zen Center in Boulder, which I think is in the Richard Baker lineage.
Yes, and then I found a group that I'm actually going to visit this evening.
Mhm.
Um, White Forest Sangha. It's a small group here in Colorado, and I really resonated the way they presented themselves on their website, and um, um, quite wonderfully, they have as their guest speaker Kazuaki Tanahashi sensei
Okay.
tonight, who I have some experience with. He will be here, so I'm very excited about
Oh, he's
that.
gonna physically be there.
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
interesting.
yeah,
Um, is it a Soto Sangha?
yes, it is.
And is there a teacher or is it peer led?
It is peer-led,
Uh-huh.
it
Okay.
appears. So I've not really experienced that kind of format, and I'm very excited about that because it feels much more egalitarian
Mhm,
than the monastic template that we have, that many of us have followed.
mhm. Um, great. Yeah, I'd like to hear how that goes,
I will
if you don't
share
mind.
that with you.
Okay. Um, so kind of to dive into the narrative aspect of this, could you talk a little bit about where you grew up and what your family was like as a young kid?
Yes, I grew up in suburban Chicago, Illinois, northwest suburbs near O'Hare Airport. And I was definitely a child of the 60s. I was a teenager during the 60s, graduated from high school. I'll date myself here. Before most of you were born. I graduated in 1969. So I had the good fortune to be part of that whole evolution of the counterculture and hippie movement. And um, we didn't have a lot of guidance in terms of, but there was a lot of guidance that was becoming introduced through the East and through cosmic consciousness. And I had a introduction to Ram Dass back in about 1970 through a series of tapes. I had some good friends that were very involved in what was then known as the Chicago Zen Center. I don't know much about that, and I wasn't involved with the center, but these people in Chicago called up Ram Dass and said, "We really like you. Why don't you come to Chicago and be with us?" So
Hmm.
Ram Dass actually came from New York or Boston to Chicago, and he spent like a week with my friends in their apartment in Chicago. And during that time, they recorded all of these conversations that they had with him. And
Hmm.
that's what we used to listen to. So that was my first introduction to him. And it was just, I felt like I'd kind of arrived. So that was kind of my first introduction. I grew up Lutheran,
Hmm.
and
Devoutly,
excuse me?
devoutly.
No, socially quasi devoutly, um, as I got to be a teenager, I would usually hang back while everybody went to church and hang out with my dad, and I would have these incredible conversations with him. And that was like going to church. And I always told him he turned me into the liberal because he made me argue the liberal perspective while he had the conservative perspective.
Hmm.
And he actually um, espoused this idea of kind of a universal consciousness and God within that really had nothing to do with that Lutheran doctrine that um, didn't make much sense to me.
Hmm.
So I think he really kind of opened me up. And then during confirmation classes, when I was like in seventh and eighth grade, we had a assistant pastor who wanted to expose us to various religions. So he took us to a Buddhist temple, he took
Really?
us to a Baha'i temple, and it really got me on this life path, I think, of looking at how the big questions have been asked and answered.
Hmm.
Um, so that was really a wonderful awakening at quite a young age. And in college, I studied philosophy and religious studies.
Hmm.
And um, I always called myself a philosophical Buddhist. I always felt um, drawn to Buddhist philosophy. And about and I practice yoga. I'm a yoga teacher, and so I looked
Is
at the
I'm
Vedanta
sorry to interrupt. Did you practice yoga as a teenager?
in my early 20s.
Okay.
I began,
Where do
and
you think, sorry to interrupt, where do you think your dad was exposed to like universal consciousness? Do you have any books laying around the house that would kind of
no,
explain?
I think it came from him. He would tell me about these dreams that he would have that were really pretty cosmic.
So he was kind of just a natural organic mystic, it sounds like then.
He was, but a practical person, very practical.
Mhm.
As a matter of fact, years ago when he was trying to tell me to go to a conventional doctor, and he said, Barb, now I want you to go to a real doctor, not one of your Buddha doctors.
Right.
So he was practical. But yeah, he really introduced me and opened me to the whole thought, concept, construct, or knowing that of oneness.
Hmm.
Yeah,
He just had an intuitive sense of it.
he did. He had an intuitive sense of it.
Hmm. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Did so you said you were kind of caught up into the 60s uh,
Yes.
rainbow explosion. So did you participate with psychedelics at all?
Oh, yes.
Uh-huh. And could you talk about that a little bit?
Um, I the group of people that I mentioned that had the Ram Dass experience were kind of my sangha, if you will, my community. And we didn't do psychedelics recreationally. We did it as kind of a sacred
Hmm.
quest. And we studied um, shamanism and um, uh, American Indians
Hmm.
and Sioux Indians in particular, and vision quests. And so when we would do psychedelics, everything would be programmed. We'd be in a safe space, beautiful music, books. It was not recreational. It was really um, an opportunity for expansiveness.
Hmm.
And so it was really quite lovely. I never had a bad experience.
Hmm.
And I did that, experimented with that for several years. And when then it was, I didn't need to do it anymore.
Did you have any experiences that now, with a little bit of hindsight, you would characterize as oneness or no self, or any of those kind of you know softening the sense of self type of experience at all?
Well, oneness and self are still my quests, or are still my intention. I mean, I work at that every day, every moment, and I'm endeavoring always to make it more than an intellectual understanding and a lived experience. So um, I can't say that I've ever really had that. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
I'm not going to claim that. I have snippets of it, and certainly I embrace it intellectually.
How about what was there anything about the psychedelic experiences that kind of, I mean, was there any intuitive sense of a greater reality? Or
Yeah,
I'm kind
I,
I'm just wondering if those experiences kind of map towards
uh,
later motivation to practice.
I think that what was revealed to me was um, the common ways that I saw things got stripped away,
Hmm.
and that reality, that life was not just the way it appeared to me before my eyes. I
Hmm.
actually had an experience once where I was sitting with someone and I saw their flesh melt away and their bones and they just became energy. And and that was it was stunning, you know. So I think that was more my experience there, that I saw what I took to be solid got stripped away.
Yeah.
And that perhaps has been my um, foundation and impetus for the quest from there.
Hmm. So in your early 20s, you discovered Hatha yoga, is that correct? Oh,
Yes,
actually, I have another question first.
yes,
Did that sangha, that kind of informal sangha, was it primarily around psychedelics, or did you guys also sit, like do some sort of meditation or any kind of
yes.
practice as
We
well?
did sit, we did talk, we read, um, we ate together, we cooked together. It was, yes, it was not about psychedelics primarily. As a matter of fact, psychedelics was irregular.
Yeah. Um, and was it a residential community, or did you guys
No,
all live separate? You just come together to,
we would just come together.
yeah. And so then you, while part of that community, did you discover yoga?
I think it was a little later. I moved to Colorado in 1973, and that's where I first got introduced to yoga. Um, I had been a distance runner, so that was my sort of physical, spiritual practice. And I got introduced to yoga, and it really um, it was very compelling. I had studied martial arts, I had studied ballet, I'd always had physical practices that were practices, not just exercise forms. And all of those were a dedication to a lifestyle and a way of being. And yoga was much more harmonious, I think. Um, Running asks for a certain thing. Ballet asks for a certain thing, and not everyone has those certain things. So what I found in yoga was a practice that could support what I had and help me uncover, unleash some of the which we'll call dukkha in my body, so that I could be uh, a more complete person in the world.
Mhm.
I think that was my first realization with it.
Yeah. I
Sense?
one thing I really like about Zen, and to be honest, I don't think this is necessarily a widespread view into Zen, is I really like the embodied somatic aspect of it. And I mean, that's what works for me, at least. And I get a lot of that kind of same dynamic from yoga in a lot of ways.
Absolutely, absolutely. I've been moving to a new location. I've felt drawn into studying some very basic texts. Like I've been working on the precepts and again, and we just had a Jukai, a Zoom Jukai yesterday. There's another one coming up on Sunday. So it's really been um, luxurious to go back and investigate the precepts. And my teacher, Valorie Beer, has recommended that when I sit every morning, I inquire which precept wants to be expressed through me today. So that's been, but the other thing that I've been studying is the four foundations of mindfulness that you happen to mention about embodied Zen. And I think that we have such an incredible roadmap almost in that sutra
Mhm.
for yoga or for any practice, making a physical practice a mindfulness practice.
Mhm. Mhm. Did you do any other forms of yoga like Raha yoga or Kundalini or any of that other
I
stuff?
I practiced when I lived in Colorado before 26 years ago. I studied Ashtanga yoga, which is
What is I've heard that word a lot, but I don't know what it is.
Ashtanga. Well, as I understand it, in the yoga, in modern yoga, there are kind of two branches
Hmm.
that came from one teacher that sort of brought yoga forward in India and had mixed it with, I think, like British calisthenics or something like that. But there
Okay,
were two branches. There was the Iyengar branch and there was the Ashtanga branch. And
so it's a
um,
type of hatha yoga.
yeah, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Patanjali, no, I'm sorry. Pattabhi Jois
Mhm.
was the sort of founder of the Ashtanga lineage, and BKS Iyengar, and they were both students of the same teacher.
Hmm.
So I studied Ashtanga for a while, and then when I moved to California, um, and I taught some in Colorado. When I moved to California, Ashtanga was not really the prevalent lineage. So I moved into Iyengar and eventually got involved with the Berkeley Yoga Room and did my teaching certification and training through them.
Could you briefly describe what the difference is between the two styles? Is it in terms of dynamics, or is it the postures, or like what?
Well, it's all the same practice, and it's just going to be a different emphasis.
Mhm.
Ashtanga is birthed the movement called flow yoga.
Oh,
And,
okay.
and it's a lot of movement, and it's a series of forms. In some ways, it's more like a martial art to me because you're moving through forms. And there is an incredible athleticism that can be experienced through that. Iyengar, and particularly the style of Iyengar that I practice through Donald Moyer in the yoga room, is alignment based. And I like to say it's a yoga practice that supports you in being the moving through space the most successfully through all your ages. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, thank you. So you were living in Colorado. You were practicing yoga. You didn't become a teacher until you went to California. Is that correct?
So I did become a teacher here in
Oh,
Colorado, and I
okay.
taught for a while, and then we moved to California, and then I thought, I'm not going to teach. The best yoga teachers in the world are in California. So I dove back into being a student, and then, I kind of got inspired by Donald Moyer's lineage at the Berkeley Yoga Room, and my teachers, Mary Lou Weprin and Ada Lusardi, and decided to do the 3-year teacher training program.
Hmm. Cool. Did you have any sort of daily practice in Colorado?
Zen practice?
Just any sort of meditative, contemplative practice at all? Or
Oh, yes. I think I've always had a contemplative and a physical practice.
Mhm,
Um, and I mean, formal meditation, not so much in the beginning. It was always a contemplative practice. I would read and I would sit and think.
mhm,
And that sort of was followed in the path of when you study philosophy, that's what you do. So the contemplative, the study part has always been as important to me as anything. And so I think that's where, when I say I was a philosophical Buddhist, I think that's what I did. And it was when I came to Sacramento, and I had a friend named Breck Jones, who some of you know, who was with Valley Streams, was a practicing Buddhist, and I knew him and asked him to invite me to Valley Streams, and the rest is history. And I shifted from being that philosophical, contemplative Buddhist
mhm.
to being a practicing Buddhist,
Do you
and it kind of
remember
came together.
do you remember any books or articles or any sort of teachings that were, when you were kind of in your studying Buddhist phase, like do any books stand out that were really meaningful to you or really drew you in?
Oh, well, I think Kanzi and D.T. Suzuki um, books. I think Thich Nhat Hanh.
Mhm,
Um, yes, Pema Chodron.
mhm,
Um, when I first came to California, I actually would go to Spirit Rock on Monday nights, and this was long before I got involved with Valley Streams. So I think I was dabbling in being a practicing Buddhist even before I came to Sacramento. So in the early 2000s, I went to Spirit Rock and sat with Jack Kornfield.
mhm, yeah. And would you do those type of insight meditation practices at home at all?
Yes,
Uh-huh.
yes.
So, wh- what was the appeal of Buddhism to you? What were you hoping to get out of it from the perspective of before you started practicing really? Like what about it grabbed you?
And continues to grab me.
Yeah. Well,
I
but sometimes our motivations shift and change with time. So I'm kind of really curious, like what was the initial hook for you?
I can't really say what that is. Uh, I can equate it to an earlier experience when I was in college. I was drawn to a particular philosopher, Baruch Spinoza, whose view was decidedly a oneness view. He was the odd man out in the Western lineage of philosophy. And it became clear to me that it wasn't, after a while, that it wasn't that I chose this philosopher. I felt rather like this philosopher chose me. You know what I'm saying? And I
Yeah.
think that's in some ways my experience with Buddhism. It isn't so much that I chose Buddhism as it chose me. Does that make sense?
Very much so, yeah. Did so in talking to a lot of people, I've noticed some pattern, and this is a little bit overly deterministic, I admit up front, but I've noticed that somewhat of a pattern. Some people get into Buddhism because they want to know the truth, right? Like, what is the truth? Why am I here? Why does life exist? Like those type of questions. Other people, sometimes they experience, death of family members or loved ones, or they realize their own mortality, and they kind of have this existential angst, and that kind of is the driver. Some people just, it really comes down to is like, I'm hurting and I don't want to hurt, and I hear Buddhism can um, help, And then maybe there's a fourth where like, I don't know, I just feel drawn to this. Are you maybe more into the fourth category or some combination?
Oh, definitely the fourth category.
Yeah.
And I think that sitting with it, I realize how much I've suffered. I don't think I suffered and I sought out Buddhism, but sitting in my practice, the suffering that I've contained has become more crystal clear to me, and has been, and thus Buddhism has been a practice for um, eliminating suffering or reducing suffering, and for not just myself, but I've taken the Bodhisattva vows to reduce suffering for others. And that's why I came back to Denver, because I have a role to play in my family. I mean, they don't want to hear this, and you don't do that by preaching or talking or giving a Dharma talk. You give it, I think, just by the way, your presence in their life and allowing them to be who they are. So,
Spending time with grandma is pretty magical.
yeah, it
Yeah,
is. It
yeah.
is.
There's something unique there that is very special.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when I met you, you and your late husband Bruce both practice at Valley Streams. Did you guys get into practice simultaneously, or did one influence the other, or how did that work?
We had a very magical relationship that whatever one was into, the other would be into it. We just enjoyed each other so much that I mean, and there were things we did that were separate, but something as important as a Zen practice,
Hmm.
um, we did that together. We were
You
drawn.
kind of discovered it simultaneously.
I think I was the rainmaker, but he certainly
Okay.
followed. And yes, so it was a shared practice,
Mhm.
very much a shared practice. And he had uh, a spiritual practice long before we met too. So he, it was not a result of our relationship that we had spiritual practices. We were spiritual people beforehand, and this became a direction we went in together.
I'm pretty sure I've told you this story, but so when I met Bruce, he was already not. So Bruce, her ex-husband, or her late husband, he had ALS and passed away from ALS. And when I met him, he was already nonverbal. And so we've actually had never communicated other than, smiles and bows and stuff. And at the time, I was feeling really conflicted about whether to get ordained or not. In retrospect, it seems silly that I was so conflicted about it. But I mean, it was it was really a real difficult decision for me, because part of it, getting ordained would have meant leaving a lay teacher who I was developing a relationship with. I felt very connected to, and I was difficult decision to move away from that. But I'll try to make this real quick. But I'd always been a lay practitioner, but then I officiated a wedding, and I had to get ordained to officiate this wedding. And during the ceremony, like it was like a bolt of lightning hit me, like, oh my God, you have to get ordained. Like this is what you need to do. It was like it was almost like I was commanded. You know what I mean? Which, I'm very anti-authoritarian and anti-groups. Like I don't like big institutions. I'm like, that's just, I think it's part of my Gen X upbringing. Like where I don't like that kind of stuff. So it was very unlikely I would go down that path. But anyway, so I was feeling this was very conflicted, and then one day I was sitting. So we were having at the Valley Stream Sangha. There's going to be a Dharma talk, and I was sitting in a chair, and Bruce was sitting next to me, and then you were sitting on the other side of Bruce. And out of the blue, I don't know how this happened. Bruce hands me a piece of paper. I open it, and it says, "You should get ordained." And boom, that decided it for me. And then it kind of, the rest was history. I mean, it was incredible. I don't know how he knew I had this conflict, or it was, and I was actually leaning against it at that point. And yeah, it was so I've always felt super connected to you and your family over that. I
Oh,
mean, it was really, I mean, I have no idea how that came about, but it was pretty
I
cool.
love that story. Thank
Yeah.
you for sharing
Had I
that.
told you that before?
Yes, you have. I love
Okay.
it. I love it.
Uh-huh.
Love it.
Well, anyway, um, where was I going with this? There's a reason I started saying this story. I can't remember now.
Something
Um,
about Bruce's
oh
illness.
yeah, so Bruce, he had ALS. Did you guys start practicing Zen prior to the diagnosis or early signs of
Oh,
symptoms?
yes, yes.
Uh-huh.
And I had done my Jukai a few years before
Hmm.
he was diagnosed.
Yeah.
Um, he he had deficits on one of his chromosomes, chromosome 9. That is the marker for ALS and frontal temporal degeneration. But we didn't know that until about 5 years into the illness erupting. And what started to occur is his speech started to slur, and you know it, we investigated different routes with different medical practitioners and neurologists. He went through all kinds of tests. They ruled out ALS. He was strong and physical. He rode his bike 15 miles, or no, I'm sorry, 13 miles a day to work every day and home. And he has this illness erupting. It did not affect his motor abilities, but only his speech. And he was still strong and vowed to have as normal a life as possible. We finally uh, got admitted into San Francisco Center for Memory and Aging, and which is a remarkable, remarkable place, and became part of their um, research. And they were the first ones that genetically identified it and that gave the diagnosis. And I think our practice helped us manage that illness as best as we could possibly manage it.
Hmm.
Um,
In a weird coincidence, Bruce was actually my wife's work colleague, and she was really surprised to hear of his ALS diagnosis because she said she had
yeah,
no sense of it at work.
wow,
Yeah.
wow. Yeah, he kept on. When I look back at the some of the symptoms that emerged, they actually started to emerge about 10 years prior to the diagnosis. But you know, we were aging, and you sort of chalk up some of those cognitive shifts as being an aging process. So it wasn't clear that there was something going on until the speech started to really decline. Um, but, we conducted ourselves. Um, Bruce had this saying, no matter what happened, every day is a good day.
Mhm.
Every day is a good day for doing whatever you want. You just have to be dressed for it. Which he got from bicycling, because he would bike in the most terrible weather. As long as he wore his rain gear, he was fine. So I think that was kind of the way he looked at life. And our practice, our belief, our staying with it, sitting with it, and not trying to lace over it or pattern over it or put a rug on it or put it in the corner. I think that helped us manage it.
Was he a student of Valerie's as well?
Yes,
Uh-huh.
yes. He did his Jukai in
Yeah,
2019.
I was there for that.
Yeah, he did. As you remember, he couldn't speak, so the voice, the echo, was the whole sangha spoke his part for him, and he sewed the face of his rakusu, but his hands started to decline, and so we kind of finished the rest of the rakusu together.
Did how did you guys, so you came to, you were going to was the place in Marin called Spirit Rock, and
Yes.
were you living in Sacramento at the time and driving over to Spirit Rock?
No, we lived in the East Bay.
Oh, you lived in the East Bay.
When we
Okay,
first came to California, we lived in the East Bay. We lived in Point Richmond, which is
I
this
see.
wonderful little jewel between like Berkeley and San Rafael, right? It's right by the Richmond Bridge. We lived there and yeah, and went to Spirit Rock.
Would you ever go to Berkeley Zen Center or San Francisco Zen Center or Green Gulch or any of those?
No, I hadn't really been introduced to Zen at that point.
I see.
Um, yeah, so it was very Vipassana
Mhm. And so
oriented.
then you moved to Sacramento, you knew someone who kind of introduced you to Valley Streams. What did you think when you showed up there?
I really liked the form of it. I really liked the um, honesty,
Mhm.
the zazenki nature of it. I really liked that the ritual.
So you like, so the bowing and the chanting, you like that
Oh,
initially.
I
People
felt
seem to have
very,
really strong feelings one way or another
yeah,
about
I really was drawn to that very much.
that. Mhm.
Yeah,
Would you and Bruce do any sort of ceremonial forms at home, like sutra chanting or bowing or anything like that?
we sat together.
You sat together. Uh-huh. And so Jim was the Tonto when you showed up.
Yes, yes, yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And did you have much interaction with Yo Leahy at all?
Oh, yes. Reverend Mio came and gave a Dharma talk once a month.
Hmm.
And Bruce and I went to Hartford Street in San Francisco also to experience that center, which was pretty wonderful. Also went to San Francisco City Center. And then we began to go to Green Gulch, and my teacher's teacher is Ed Brown, so I really like to experience Ed Brown. So he would often give a day long at Green Gulch, and we would
Yeah,
often
I've
go
been to many of
there.
those. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you ever experience any 7-day sessions or any extended retreats like that?
Not there, but I've had them at my house.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
As a matter of fact, it was really wonderful. My teacher Valorie, Beer, who doesn't have a Zendo facility, we've held Rahatso in my house for many years.
Oh yeah, that's right. I remember you saying that.
Yeah.
How did you meet Valerie? What attracted to her? What attracted you to her as a teacher?
Well, I went to hear her give a talk, and she did a day long at SBMG.
Hmm.
And
Sacramento Buddhist Meditation Group.
yes, and really, I think my Dharma brother Clem Spring was the Yenta here. He was the
Mhm.
matchmaker because I was wanting to find a teacher, and it was clear to me, I don't mean to be so gender focused, but it was clear to me that I wanted to study with a woman teacher. And so he was very enthusiastic about Valorie and introduced us.
Clem
And
was.
excuse me?
Clem was enthusiastic.
Yes.
Hmm.
And so uh, I found my match.
Hmm. Yeah, I just love her energy. She's just like a rock, like a pillar. She's like
She's a rock, and
yeah.
she uh, there's something so familiar
Mhm,
between us that is definitely family like.
mhm,
Um, and in terms of our life history and path and vocational, we've had a lot of parallels.
mhm,
And so I learned so much from her, uh,
mhm, yeah,
and her patience.
mhm. What was the transition from casually knowing her to becoming a formal student? How did that work?
It feels like it just naturally evolved.
Hmm.
It it feels like I just started sewing with her and then started practicing with her. It's kind of like, it's very much like you inquired about how did I become involved with Buddhism? It kind of found me.
Did you ask formally to start sewing?
Yes,
Yeah, so I mean I guess that would maybe be the
yes,
demarcation point where,
yes,
okay, I
yes.
want to
I did
study with this person.
start sewing, yes.
Yeah. Uh-huh. And so you said you did Jukai. Was um what was Jukai for you? Was it mostly a question of commitment and deepening practices, or did the precepts themselves resonate with you?
That year of sewing a rakusu and doing nothing but studying the precepts was life transforming for me.
Hmm.
That's why I love to go back and study precepts. I love to go to Jukai's because it was such a monumental experience.
Hmm.
And so in taking Jukai, receiving the precepts, it felt like um, claiming what I already knew in front of people that I loved and loved me.
Hmm.
It was a sacrament.
How did you study them? Did you go through them one by one with Valerie?
I did. And then my last 2 months, it was like study one precept a week. So, yes.
Hmm.
And even now when I go, they're so evocative. What comes up is just so amazing, just so amazing. And it's wonderful to have them. They're not only just a refuge, but I was thinking about this the other day. They're also kind of like a touchstone. Moving to a new place, I get dazzled by the differences and things and different people, and staying focused in my precepts really helps me stay grounded.
Hmm. Did which precept was most opaque or difficult for you to really kind of wrap your mind around, or if any? I don't want to imply it's necessarily the case.
Well, there are those that you think, oh, I've got this one. Who cares about that? And the
Hmm.
more you study them, you find that there's more to them than appears on the surface. I would say the ones that I've been really sitting with of late, I can't remember so much. I think they were all pretty mind-boggling.
Hmm.
Uh, No, during my preparation for Jukai, the one that didn't seem to appeal to me was misusing sexuality, because I thought, well, I don't have to worry about that. I'm happily married. I'm older. It's like, that doesn't mean anything to me. But diving deeper, I understood that it was about intimacy and the sharing of power between people. So there were so many layers of it that there was an invitation for me from that one as well.
And it can also be about identity as well.
Oh, yes, it could be about identity.
Mhm.
And so I think the ones that have been uh, inviting me to sit with them since this move have been sustaining life, not killing, um, because you get I got out of my comfort zone coming to a new place, and all of a sudden um, I see preferences and judgmentalism coming arising in me that like I thought I had overcome that.
Right.
It's so funny, you know? So, uh,
I mean,
no,
the second Bodhisattva vow was put there for a reason, you know.
oh my gosh. And then, not stealing has been a really important one to me too. Not stealing time away from your cushion by idle chatter has really been speaking to me lately. Um, so there just are so many emanations and ways that you can um, deepen your inquiry and your investigation.
Mhm. Um, so can you talk a little bit about how you came to be a sewing teacher in the sewing the Buddha's robe tradition?
That experience of the year
Hmm.
of sewing was so wonderful that I wanted to sew.
Hmm.
I had a background in sewing too. I grew up in a kind of a family of women seamstresses. My mother was a remarkable seamstress. I could sew at a sewing machine when I was 5 years old. I was the one who was expected to go to New York and go into the fashion industry, become a designer. But
Wow.
it was the 60s and I wasn't going to do what they wanted me to do. I was going to study philosophy, damn it.
Mhm.
But so sewing, practical arts has always been, and art making has been really important to me, has been a vehicle. So uh, just as Zen brought together so many seemingly disparate threads in my life, the sewing of the robe was that for me as well.
Mhm.
And so I was really um, saw that as a way that I could practice with others and serve others.
Mhm. Great. What sewing? Obviously, there's the little mantra we say while we sew. I mean, would you? I mean, that was obviously a type of meditation for you. Is that correct?
True.
Yeah.
And you can bring that forward into other practices.
Hmm.
Um, I learned to knit from my mother. So and I don't do it often, but when I knit, I say every stitch is Namo Kie Butsu. When I've been focusing on handmade artist books,
Hmm.
and I
Are
say
those
Namo
those folding
Kie.
things that you do where you can put things in? Is that
That's one form, that's the Chinese thread book,
okay?
but, yeah, I really enjoy, making handmade books. Not
Hmm.
homemade, handmade books. And so I bring that meditative Namo Kie Butsu into that practice as well. So I think that I'm grateful that the practice of sewing Buddha's robe has really inspired other practices, hand practices that I do.
Um, so you touched on this a little bit, and I know this is kind of difficult, but could you so as your husband's illness deepened and it kind of became a hospice type situation, could you talk a little bit about how your practice intersected with that transition?
It became Everything became difficult.
Hmm.
And what I've learned is that you practice and you do, but sometimes you can't, and you got to say that you can't.
Hmm.
And there's a lot that I couldn't. Um, it, I had this when we made the decision to move into hospice, which was in September 2019. He passed away in April 2020. Um, I had this vision that it was going to be this beautiful thing. We'd sit together and hold hands and just be together. And I never got to do that because home hospice, you are a caregiver. And the only time I ever got to sit with him and hold his hand was the 2 times he was hospitalized and somebody else was doing all the work. So it was, uh, um, I experienced that when one person in a intimate couple gets an illness, you both get the illness. You both get the illness. ALS showed up in Bruce with the symptoms of ALS. ALS showed up in me as the deep-seated fears and angers that I had been following me since childhood. And I wasn't even conscious of those things from childhood so much as just all it's fear. Fear is just a big thing. Fear is the fuel of anger. And so it was a really difficult time.
And
But
I remember after he passed away, you kind of just cocooned up a bit, right?
yeah, it was the beginning of the pandemic.
Hmm.
So I sheltered for a year and a half, and I kind of felt like the whole world was sheltering with me, actually. Um, yeah, I sat on my couch, and I had been prepared for grief,
Hmm.
but I wasn't prepared for kind of the recovery. It
Hmm.
took about a year and a half to really recover from that. But I sat. I always thought when he passed away, I would go do a monastic thing someplace. And I realized I didn't have to go anyplace to have a monastic experience. I had that in my house. Um, I would just sit and stare into space.
Hmm.
um, we had a swimming pool. I would sit in my swimming pool with my feet dangling in it and just stare at the stars.
Hmm.
Uh, and this is not sad modeling thing. It's just um, kind of sitting in. I don't know if I would call it emptiness exactly, as just nowhere and somewhere at the same time.
Hmm.
And I came to the place where I found that the journey that I'd been on through since childhood and all the things I had done had been a component of that journey. That journey had come to an end.
Hmm.
So making the decision to move was quite easy for me. Um, I search for that person and it's not there anymore. It's kind of a really interesting result of this whole process. And it really is a very sacred quest. And so while the ALS and losing my beloved were terrible, I'm grateful to be able to sit and talk as I am today.
If you had any advice to give someone who's kind of going through a bereavement mourning process, what advice could you give them?
Sit with it. Don't try to stuff it. We know this from our practice. Um, Sit with it, befriend it, allow it. Don't be afraid of it. There's much that it teaches you. And then there's much that you can take out in the world and be a teacher and a healer for others.
And speaking of which, I know Valorie is wanting to lay and trust you, and that was kind of delayed by the the illness and then the the pandemic, of course. Um, and you mentioned that so you were I remember you were working on green rakusu. It's because of the Soto tradition. When you're in lay entrusted, you get the green rakusu.
Yes.
You'd mentioned that. y- So after all this had happened, you picked it up to start working on it again, and that kind of brought up a lot. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I mentioned that Bruce was did his Jukai in 2019.
Hmm.
When he started sewing his Rakusu a year before that, I began sewing my green Rakusu. So we were
Hmm.
sort of in the beginning sewing our Rakusus together. And then I got the face done on mine, and I was helping him with his. I put it away. I went through the caregiving, the loss, the grief, and I had several, I, even when he passed away, I had several sewing students who were sewing with me. And probably 8 months ago, I thought, I'm going to pick up that green Rakusu again. So I brought it out and I started sewing on it. And it's like, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck.
Hmm.
It was really, I got sick. I had to lay down and I sat with it and I thought, this Rakusu embodies the pain body
Hmm.
that I experienced with the loss of Bruce and the being the caregiver and all that illness is a very traumatic illness. There's falls and it's not an easy thing to deal with. And so all of that pain body was captured in that Rakusu.
Hmm.
You know, when they say that your Rakusu is your roadmap or where the inquiry you've been in during that time that you sew, it's clear that is. So it became, and I just said, I can't continue, I don't want to continue this. So I asked of my teacher, may I discontinue working on this Rakusu? And she said yes.
Hmm.
But then we did a ceremony for it, you
Hmm.
know, and it did not come with me to Colorado. So
Oh, really?
I I'm going to be ready to begin a new one.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Um, could you, so, you're kind of in the transition from student to teacher, kind of formally. What does being a Zen teacher mean to you? Like, what do you see as like what is the role of a Zen teacher? What are you, what do you envision about the whole thing?
I think it is being a listener.
Hmm.
Um, um, Wisdom and compassion. Listening is kind of the thread that combines the two.
Hmm.
Um, it's listening. It's sitting with. It's being the presence of this of open of the heart of at rest, the heart of openness,
Hmm.
um, so that people who sit with you can work on whatever they need to work on.
Hmm.
It's not being reactive. It's being open. It's sitting in that Diane Rossetto, I think that's her name.
Yeah, she was actually, I worked with her for a while.
Oh, she's right. Well, she has this term called the dead spot, which I just love. I like to think of it more rather than not use the words the dead spot is the resting spot,
Hmm.
the the heart at rest. I think that's what I would be my path as a teacher. And I've been a teacher. I'm a yoga teacher. I'm a sewing teacher. I feel in my bones that being a teacher is part of my bones,
Hmm.
always has been.
Hmm.
Um, And so then, when you're invited to become a Zen teacher, it's like, I'm not good enough. I don't know the liturgy to the extent that everybody does, but, we have much more to share than just the liturgy with people.
Is your you mentioned you're revisiting the precepts? Is that in preparation for the lay entrustment ceremony, which I've never actually been to one in the Suzuki Roshi lineage, but my understanding it's kind of like another ordination.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
and but no, I'm studying the precepts because the precepts have invited me to step back into them.
Okay, great.
And again, making this transition, and I mean, I still wake up. I've been here for 3 weeks. I still wake up in the morning and I don't know where I am.
If you turn the camera around, will there be a bunch of boxes?
No, all the boxes are unpacked, fortunately.
Okay, good.
Um, but no, I don't know where I am. So I think that studying the precepts, studying the Genjo Koan, studying the Four Foundations of Mindfulness, some
Mhm,
of that fundamental stuff is just helping me um, get grounded in this new place.
mhm.
Yeah.
So has there ever been any? So you're going to be entrusted as a lay teacher. Um, any thoughts about getting ordained as a priest? Is that crept into your mind at all?
I have been trying to discern the difference between a teacher and a priest.
Hmm.
And in my crude understanding,
Hmm.
and I apologize if I'm offending anyone, it seems to me that the difference between a teacher and a priest is priests are teachers and they have the awesome responsibility of continuing the forms
Hmm.
and continue perpetuating the lineage. And a teacher is not so um, responsible for that.
Hmm.
So I guess that's the difference that I see. And I'm I just take it one step at a time. I mean, Buddhism called me home.
Hmm.
Teaching called me home, sewing called me home. We'll see what calls me home next. I've always had this philosophy of I don't make any plans, I see what lures me in. So we'll see.
So before we wrap up, is there anything you'd like to talk about, or anything you'd like to address?
I'm just so grateful for the Sangha, the many Sanghas, and there you find community in many places. The wonderful blessings that I have in my life, the practice.
Hmm.
What good news it is to have this practice,
Hmm.
you know? What good news it is to be able to survive the loss of your beloved, to see, your parents, to see your children and grandchildren grow up in a world of terror, to see the terrible stuff in the world and be able to come home to this practice. What good news. I'm just grateful. I'm grateful for everything. That's it. And thank you to all the teachers, the numerous teachers and beings on my path and friends.
If someone wanted to get a hold of you, what would be the best way for them to do so?
Email.
Okay.
You can broadcast my email address if you'd like.
Okay. Could you just say it now?
Yes, it's Barb Baccei. You pronounced my name incorrectly in the beginning, by the
Oh,
way.
sorry.
That's okay. Everybody does. It's BARBBACCEI at Gmail.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
What did I say? Bocce?
You did.
Oh, that's embarrassing. Okay, sorry
That's
about that.
okay. That's all right. Everybody does. All right.
All right, have
Thank
a
you
wonderful
so
day.
much. You are a skillful interviewer and it's very comfortable and I hope I didn't babble too much.
Oh, no, not at all. Thank you so
All
much.
right.
Okay,
Thank you. Be well.
you too.